the most dangerous lies are never whispered in dark alleys. They're spoken over candlelight, with polished silverware and perfect smiles. My name is Claire Morgan, and before that Thursday night, I believed people like me could work a double shift, collect a paycheck, and disappear into the city without leaving a trace. I was wrong. The dining room of Ashford House glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, each one reflecting warm light across white linen tablecloths and polished wine glasses that cost more than my monthly car payment. The scent of fresh rosemary, butter, and grilled steak floated through the air while a jazz trio played softly near the marble fireplace. It was the kind of place where powerful people came to celebrate deals that changed companies, cities, maybe even lives. For me, it was simply another 12-hour shift. My feet already ached inside black dress shoes that had seen too many weekends, and the digital clock above the service station read 8:17 p.m. The dinner rush was in full swing. Couples toasted anniversaries. Executives laughed louder after every bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet. I smiled, refilled glasses, cleared plates, and reminded myself that nursing school tuition wasn't going to pay itself. Table 7 had been reserved for 3 days under the name Bennett. Even our general manager seemed nervous every time he glanced toward the reservation list. Around 8:30, the front doors opened without fanfare. No flashing cameras. No raised voices. Just 6 men in tailored dark suits entering with the quiet confidence of people who never needed to announce themselves. They didn't scan the room. They expected the room to adjust around them. And somehow, it did. Conversation softened. Servers instinctively stepped aside. Even the pianist hesitated for half a second before continuing. Then I saw him. Adrian Bennett couldn't have been much older than 33. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit that fit like it had been stitched directly onto him. Dark hair neatly combed back. Calm blue eyes that never seemed rushed. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't angry either. He simply carried himself like a man accustomed to being obeyed. I grabbed a leather menu and approached table 7 with the practiced smile I'd worn thousands of times before. "Good evening. Welcome to Ashford House." He looked up, meeting my eyes for exactly one heartbeat before returning his attention to the others. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone at the table heard it immediately. I poured sparkling water into crystal glasses, careful not to spill a drop. The conversation remained ordinary at first. Real estate. Shipping schedules. Charity events. The kind of topics wealthy people discussed between appetizers. Then one of the older men leaned forward and lowered his voice. I wasn't trying to listen. I was simply replacing bread plates when I heard the sentence that stopped my hands. "She can't know she's still alive." My fingers froze around the porcelain dish. For a fraction of a second, I wondered if I'd misunderstood. Maybe I'd heard the wrong words. Maybe exhaustion had blurred them together. Then another voice answered calmly. "She never will if everyone keeps telling the same story." My heartbeat echoed louder than the music. I carefully set the plate onto the table without making a sound, forcing myself to breathe normally. Waitresses hear private conversations every day. It wasn't my business. It couldn't become my business. I turned to leave, but before I reached the service station, something made me glance back. Adrian Bennett wasn't looking at the man who had spoken. He was looking directly at me. His expression hadn't changed. No anger. No surprise. Just quiet recognition, as if he already knew exactly what I had heard. And somehow, that frightened me far more than if he had shouted. I told myself I was imagining it. 12 hours on my feet could make anyone hear the wrong thing, and rich people loved speaking in riddles that sounded more dramatic than they really were. I picked up my empty serving tray and walked toward the kitchen with measured steps, refusing to look back even though every instinct urged me to. The swinging doors closed behind me, replacing the soft jazz with the familiar orchestra of clattering dishes, sizzling pans, and hurried voices. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in a full minute. Claire, table 12 needs another bottle of Pinot, my coworker Megan called while balancing 3 dessert plates. I nodded automatically, grateful for something ordinary to focus on. Ordinary was safe. Ordinary paid my rent. I reached for the bottle, but before I could leave the service station, our general manager appeared beside me so suddenly that I almost dropped it. His usual confident smile had disappeared. Claire, he said quietly, finish serving table 7 tonight. Nobody else. I frowned. Why me? He hesitated for a second too long. Because they requested it. A strange chill crept across my shoulders. Requested me? That made no sense. I had never seen those guests before in my life. I carried the wine into the dining room, reminding myself that wealthy customers often had unusual preferences. Maybe they appreciated careful service. Maybe I was overthinking everything. When I reached the table, the conversation stopped as naturally as someone lowering the volume on a radio. Adrian Bennett glanced toward me while the others studied their menus as though they had been discussing nothing more important than dessert. I poured the wine carefully into each glass. My hands remained steady, but I could feel my pulse beating against my wrist. Will there be anything else this evening? I asked. One of the older gentlemen smiled politely. No, thank you. Adrian remained silent until I turned to leave. Miss Morgan. Hearing my last name made me stop. I slowly faced him again. Yes, sir? His blue eyes held mine with calm precision. How long have you worked here? It seemed like an innocent question, but something about the way he asked it made every word feel carefully chosen. Almost 3 years. He nodded once. You must be very observant. My throat tightened. I tried to provide good service. For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth lifted into the faintest hint of a smile. It was not warm. It was thoughtful. That is a valuable quality. I excused myself before the silence became unbearable. The moment I entered the kitchen again, I leaned against the stainless steel counter, pretending to organize receipts while my thoughts raced. How did he know my name without looking at my name tag? Why had the manager assigned only me to that table? Why did it feel like every ordinary explanation kept slipping away the harder I reached for it? 20 minutes later, the dinner service finally slowed. I carried the check to table 7. The leather folder rested untouched where I placed it. Adrian signed the receipt with smooth, unhurried strokes before closing it and sliding it toward me. Thank you for your professionalism tonight, he said. Have a safe trip home. There was nothing threatening about his voice. Nothing unusual about the words themselves. Yet somehow they sounded less like a farewell and more like a reminder that he already knew exactly where I would be going when my shift ended. I finished rolling silverware long after the last guests had disappeared into the Manhattan night. The dining room looked strangely peaceful without the soft murmur of expensive conversations. Half-burned candles flickered across empty tables, and the polished hardwood floors reflected the fading light from the chandeliers above. It was almost 11:30 when I untied my apron and slipped it into my locker. My shoulders felt heavy, the familiar ache of another double shift settling into every muscle. I checked my phone. 2 unread messages from my younger sister asking if I had made it through another crazy night. 1 overdue tuition reminder. Nothing else. I smiled faintly, typed a quick reply promising I would call tomorrow, and walked toward the employee exit. Cool October air greeted me the moment I stepped outside. The city sounded different this late. Traffic had thinned, leaving only distant sirens, the rumble of buses, and the occasional taxi gliding through wet streets still shining from an earlier rain. My little blue Honda sat 3 rows away beneath a flickering parking lot light. I wrapped my jacket tighter and reached into my purse for my keys. Miss Morgan. The voice came from behind me, calm enough that I almost thought I imagined it. I turned slowly. Adrian Bennett stood several feet away with his hands resting comfortably inside the pockets of his charcoal overcoat. He had somehow traded the formal dining room for the quiet parking lot without making a sound. Two other men waited near a black sedan parked farther back, giving him complete privacy while watching everything around them. "You startled me," I admitted. "I apologize," he replied. "That was not my intention." His expression remained composed, almost unreadable beneath the pale parking lot lights. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. I could hear the soft hum of the city beyond the brick buildings, the rustle of leaves carried by a cool breeze, and my own heartbeat growing louder with every passing moment. "Did I do something wrong?" I finally asked. He shook his head once. "Quite the opposite." That answer only confused me more. "Then why are you here?" Adrian glanced briefly toward the restaurant entrance before returning his attention to me. "Because there is something you should know before someone else decides to tell you." My fingers tightened around my car keys. "I really do not know anything." "I believe you." His response came immediately. "The problem is that other people may not." I searched his face for some sign that this was a joke, but found none. His calm never cracked. "I heard one sentence," I said carefully. "I was not trying to listen." "I know." He stepped no closer, respecting the distance between us in a way I had not expected. Good employees hear many things. Most forget them before the end of the night. "And if they do not?" I asked quietly. A faint breeze lifted a strand of my hair across my face. Adrian waited until I brushed it aside before answering. "Sometimes remembering becomes an inconvenience for people who prefer comfortable stories." The words settled heavily between us. I wanted to ask what they meant. I wanted to ask who the woman was, why someone believed she should remain hidden, and why everyone around table 7 had looked so calm while discussing something that sounded impossible. Instead, I asked the only question that felt safe. "Why are you warning me?" For the first time since we met, something softened in his blue eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something close to regret. "Because you looked surprised," he said quietly. "People pretending usually do not." Before I could respond, one of the men beside the sedan glanced discreetly toward the street. Adrian followed his gaze for only a second before looking back at me. "Go home, Claire. Call your sister tomorrow morning like you planned. Go to class next week. Continue living exactly as you did yesterday." I blinked. "How do you know I have a sister?" He offered no answer. Instead, he inclined his head politely, turned, and walked toward the waiting sedan. As the car disappeared into the quiet Manhattan traffic, I realized something that made the cold air feel even colder. I had never told Adrian Bennett a single thing about my life, yet somehow he already knew the parts that mattered most. Sleep never really came that night. I closed my eyes, but every time I drifted towards silence, I heard his voice again. "Continue living exactly as you did yesterday." It sounded simple, almost comforting, until I realized how impossible it had become. By 7 o'clock the next morning I was sitting in my favorite corner of a neighborhood coffee shop, wrapping both hands around a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm. Outside, New York rushed through another weekday. People hurried towards subway entrances with headphones in their ears and briefcases in their hands, each one carrying worries I would never know. I envied them. Their lives still seemed predictable. Mine had somehow changed because of a single dinner shift. I opened my nursing textbook and stared at the same page for nearly 15 minutes without reading a single sentence. Human anatomy suddenly felt much easier to understand than human behavior. My phone vibrated. It was my younger sister, Emily. I answered immediately. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "You actually picked up on the first ring. That is new." I laughed, grateful for the sound of her voice. "I guess I needed something normal today." "Rough shift?" she asked. I considered telling her everything. The strange conversation. The mysterious warning. The man who somehow knew details about my life that I had never shared. Instead, I smiled to myself and said, "Just a long night." We talked about her college classes, our mother's birthday next month, and whether we could still afford to visit our aunt in Connecticut over Thanksgiving. Ordinary conversations. Safe conversations. When we finally hung up, I realized something unsettling. Adrian had known I would call Emily that morning. Not because he could predict the future, but because someone had already learned enough about my life to know my routines. The thought stayed with me all day. My afternoon lecture ended just after 3. Rain clouds had gathered over Manhattan, turning the sky a soft gray that matched the glass buildings surrounding campus. As I crossed the street toward the subway station, I noticed a black sedan parked across the avenue. It could have belonged to anyone. Hundreds of black sedans drove through the city every hour. I told myself not to be ridiculous. Still, when I descended into the station, I glanced back one more time. The car remained exactly where it was. By evening I reported back to Ashford House for another shift. The restaurant looked identical to the night before. The same polished silver. The same candlelight. The same quiet elegance. Yet something had changed. Or perhaps I had. Every unfamiliar face caught my attention. Every lowered voice made me wonder what story existed beneath the surface. Megan noticed before anyone else. "Claire," she whispered while arranging clean glasses, "are you feeling all right? You keep looking toward the entrance." "I am just tired," I answered. It was only half a lie. Around 6:30 our manager approached with a sealed white envelope. "This was delivered for you about an hour ago." My stomach tightened. There was no stamp. No mailing address. Only my name written neatly across the front. "Who brought it?" I asked. He shrugged. "A courier. He did not stay." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of expensive cream-colored paper. No signature. No greeting. Just one sentence typed in the center of the page. Some stories sound unbelievable because they were never meant to be discovered. Beneath the paper rested an old black and white photograph. It showed a smiling young woman standing in front of Ashford House nearly 20 years earlier. My breath caught the instant I saw her face. She looked so much like me that for one impossible second I wondered whether I was somehow staring at my own reflection from another lifetime. I could not stop staring at the photograph. The woman looked as though she had borrowed my face. The same light brown hair falling just past her shoulders. The same blue-gray eyes. Even the small dimple on her left cheek appeared when she smiled. The only real difference was the style of her clothes, a cream-colored coat and a modest dress that belonged to another decade. My fingers trembled as I turned the picture over. Nothing. No date. No name. No explanation. "Claire?" Megan's voice pulled me back. "Are you okay?" I quickly slipped the photograph back into the envelope before she could see it. "Yes. Just an old family picture, I think." It was another half-truth, and I hated how easily they were becoming part of my vocabulary. The dinner rush swept us back into motion before I could think any further. Orders arrived one after another. Ribeye steaks. Lobster ravioli. Roasted salmon. I carried trays across the dining room almost on instinct, smiling at guests while my thoughts stayed trapped inside that mysterious envelope folded neatly in my apron pocket. Every few minutes I caught myself touching it, making sure it was still there. Around 7:30 I found a quiet moment beside the service station and discreetly searched the restaurant's website on my phone. Ashford House had been operating for nearly 40 years. The homepage displayed historical photographs celebrating its anniversary. I scrolled through image after image, comparing them with the photograph in my pocket. Different owners. Different chefs. Different renovations. Then one picture stopped me. It showed the grand reopening celebration from 19 years earlier. Dozens of employees stood outside the front entrance wearing matching uniforms. I enlarged the image until the pixels blurred. There she was. Standing in the second row. The same woman from my photograph. The resemblance to me felt almost impossible. Interesting, is it not? I looked up so suddenly that I nearly dropped my phone. An elderly gentleman stood near the host stand, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime observing people. I had not heard him approach. "I am sorry?" I asked. His eyes drifted briefly toward the envelope peeking from my apron pocket before returning to my face. Some faces have a way of repeating themselves. Before I could respond, another guest called for assistance, and I instinctively turned away to refill a water glass. The interruption lasted no more than 30 seconds. When I looked back, the elderly man was gone. I scanned the dining room. He was not waiting near the entrance. He was not seated at any table. It was as though he had simply dissolved into the evening crowd. My pulse quickened. During my break, I asked our manager whether he knew the man. He frowned thoughtfully after I described him. "No reservation like that tonight," he answered. "Are you sure he was even dining here?" I nodded slowly, though my confidence faded with every passing second. Had I imagined him? That seemed impossible. Yet no one else appeared to have noticed him. As my shift ended, curiosity outweighed caution. Instead of driving home immediately, I unlocked my laptop in the empty employee lounge and searched public archives for Ashford House history. Most articles repeated the same information until one old newspaper clipping caught my attention. The headline mentioned a charity gala held 19 years ago. Beneath the article was a group photograph. My eyes moved across the smiling faces until they landed on the young woman again. This time there was a caption. It read, "Restaurant hostess Evelyn Harper, missing 1 week after the event, was remembered by friends as kind, dependable, and impossible to forget." I whispered her name aloud without realizing it. Evelyn Harper. Missing. Not deceased. Missing. Suddenly the sentence I had overheard at dinner echoed through my mind with terrifying clarity. She cannot know she is still alive. For the first time, I began to wonder if those words had never been about the present at all. I did not leave the employee lounge until nearly midnight. The cleaning crew had already begun polishing the dining room floors, and the rhythmic hum of the floor buffer echoed faintly through the walls. I folded the newspaper article, slipped the photograph back into its envelope, and locked both inside my backpack. Every instinct told me to forget everything. Finish nursing school. Keep working. Pretend none of this had ever happened. But curiosity has a quiet voice that becomes impossible to ignore once it begins asking questions. The next morning I visited the New York Public Library before my afternoon classes. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while rows of old newspapers and city directories stretched farther than I could see. I searched for Evelyn Harper again. There were only a handful of articles. Every one of them ended the same way. Missing. Investigation suspended. Family relocated. It was as though her life had simply stopped on paper. No obituary. No memorial. No explanation. Just silence. I copied the articles into my notebook, feeling guilty for digging into the life of a woman I had never met. As I packed my things, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A calm, familiar voice replied. "Miss Morgan." My heartbeat immediately quickened. "How did you get this number?" Adrian Bennett ignored the question. "Where are you?" I looked around the quiet reading room. "Why does that matter?" "Because you are searching for answers in places where only half the story was ever written." I stood from my chair and walked toward the library entrance, lowering my voice. "You have been following me." "No," he answered evenly. "I have been trying to stay one step ahead of people who might." The distinction unsettled me more than I expected. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Yellow taxis splashed through puddles while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. "You sent the photograph," I said. "Yes." "Why?" There was a brief silence before he answered. Because you deserve to know that your questions are real. Who was Evelyn Harper? Another pause. Longer this time. Someone who trusted the wrong version of the truth. His answer only deepened my frustration. You keep speaking in riddles. Because direct answers place people in situations they cannot leave. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath. I am already in one. Adrian did not argue. There is a small cafe on West 42nd Street. Corner table by the front window. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock. If you still want answers, I will meet you there. Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. I stared at my phone, half expecting the number to disappear from the screen. Instead it remained, ordinary and unremarkable. The following evening arrived with the kind of steady autumn rain that turned Manhattan into a blur of reflected lights. I almost cancelled 3 different times during my subway ride. Common sense insisted I should stay away. Yet something stronger kept carrying me forward. The cafe was warm, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon pastries. Students worked quietly on laptops while a young couple laughed over slices of cheesecake. Nothing about the place suggested secret conversations or hidden histories. Adrian was already there, seated exactly where he had said he would be. No bodyguard stood beside him. No expensive suit this time. Just a dark wool sweater beneath a simple overcoat, making him look almost like any other professional finishing a long workday. Almost. He stood politely as I approached and waited until I sat before taking his seat again. A waitress placed 2 cups of coffee on the table without asking for our order. She smiled at Adrian as though she recognized him as a regular customer. He thanked her by name. I studied him in silence until he finally spoke. You came. I almost did not. He nodded once. That would have been the safer decision. I reached into my backpack, removed the photograph of Evelyn Harper, and gently placed it between us. Then tell me why she has my face. Adrian did not reach for the photograph immediately. Instead, he looked at it with the quiet familiarity of someone revisiting a memory he had spent years trying to bury. The cafe buzzed softly around us. Steam drifted from fresh cups of coffee. A barista laughed with a customer near the register. The ordinary sounds felt strangely distant, as though our small corner existed outside the rest of Manhattan. Finally, Adrian rested one hand beside the picture without touching it. Because you are not the first woman to walk into Ashford House carrying that face, he said quietly. I frowned. That is not an answer. No, he admitted. It is only the beginning of one. I folded my arms, determined not to let him steer the conversation away again. Who was Evelyn Harper? He held my gaze for several seconds before speaking. She worked at Ashford House when she was 26. Everyone described her the same way. Honest. Kind. The type of person who believed every problem could be solved if people simply told the truth. Something about those words unsettled me. They sounded less like a biography and more like a warning. What happened to her? Adrian looked toward the rain sliding down the cafe window. She overheard a conversation she was never supposed to hear. I felt the air leave my lungs. Just like me. Yes. Neither of us spoke for a moment. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. Was she? I hesitated before finishing the question. Was she really missing? Adrian answered without hesitation. She disappeared from public records. That was not the same answer. I recognized the difference immediately. You keep choosing your words very carefully. Because every word matters. I leaned closer across the table. Then let me ask differently. Is Evelyn Harper alive? He did not answer. Instead, his attention shifted briefly toward the cafe entrance where a middle-aged man in a gray business suit had just walked inside carrying a folded umbrella. The stranger ordered coffee without looking in our direction, yet Adrian continued watching him for another second before returning his attention to me. Claire, he said softly, have you noticed something unusual since this began? I thought about the black sedan. The anonymous envelope. The unknown caller. The elderly gentleman who had vanished. I have noticed that people seem to know where I am. Adrian nodded. Exactly. Yet no one has threatened you. No one has demanded anything from you. They are only watching. Why? Because someone is trying to learn how much you know. His answer settled heavily between us. I stared at the photograph again. You said I deserved to know the truth. Yes. Then stop protecting me from it. For the first time since we met, I saw genuine conflict cross his face. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was real. Very well, he said quietly. The conversation you overheard at the restaurant. He paused, choosing his next words with extraordinary care. It was not about Evelyn Harper. I blinked in confusion. What? Everyone at that table believed it was. They were wrong. My thoughts stumbled over themselves. Then who were they talking about? Adrian slowly pushed the photograph toward me. That is the lie. I searched his expression for any sign of deception but found none. If they were not talking about Evelyn, then why send me her picture? He looked directly into my eyes. Because someone wanted you to believe the mystery began 19 years ago. His voice became even quieter. It did not. A cold shiver ran through me despite the warmth of the cafe. When did it begin? Adrian answered with a sadness I had never heard before. 27 years ago. My mind raced. 27 years. Exactly my age. Before I could ask another question, my phone vibrated on the table. The screen displayed a message from Emily. It contained only 7 words. Claire, who is the man watching our apartment? I looked up instantly. Adrian had already seen the fear on my face before I said a single word. My hands began shaking before I even realized I had stood up. The chair scraped softly across the cafe floor, drawing a few curious glances from nearby customers. I stared at Emily's message again, hoping I had somehow misread it. The words remained exactly the same. Claire, who is the man watching our apartment? I immediately called her. 1 ring. 2. 3. Every second felt impossibly long. She finally answered with her usual bright voice, completely unaware that my heart was pounding. Hey. I was just about to call you. Emily, I interrupted gently, trying to keep my voice calm. Are you inside the apartment? Yes. Why? Stay there for a minute. Tell me exactly what you saw. She walked toward the living room window. I could hear the floorboards creak beneath her footsteps. There is a man across the street. Dark coat. Maybe 40 years old. He has been standing near the newspaper stand for almost 20 minutes. I thought he was waiting for someone, but every time I look outside, he is still there. Adrian watched my face without speaking. Somehow he already understood every word she was saying. Did he speak to you? I asked. No. Did he come inside the building? No. Does he seem dangerous? Emily laughed softly. Claire, you sound like I am in a spy movie. He's just standing there drinking coffee. I forced myself to breathe. Keep your doors locked anyway. I always do. Promise me. I promise. We ended the call, but I continued holding the phone long after the screen went dark. Adrian quietly pushed his untouched coffee aside. Your sister is safe. I looked at him sharply. How can you possibly know that? Because if someone wanted to frighten her, they would have approached her. Whoever is outside only wants information. I hated that his explanation made sense. Who are they? I asked. Not my people. His answer came immediately. There was no hesitation. Then whose? Adrian leaned back slightly, his expression growing thoughtful. Someone inside my family believes that old secrets should remain exactly where they are. I frowned. You said everyone at the restaurant believed the wrong story. Most of them do. Not you? He slowly shook his head. I stopped believing it several years ago. Before I could ask another question, the bell above the cafe door chimed again. The middle-aged man in the gray business suit who had entered earlier collected his coffee and quietly walked out without ever looking in our direction. Adrian followed him with his eyes until he disappeared onto the sidewalk. We need to leave, he said calmly. Now. We stepped into the cool evening together. Rain had stopped, leaving the streets glossy beneath rows of glowing streetlights. The city smelled of wet pavement, roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, and fresh autumn air. Adrian did not rush. He simply walked beside me at an even pace, hands inside his coat pockets, as though we were two co-workers leaving the office after an ordinary day. Are we being followed? I asked quietly. Probably. How can you sound so calm? A faint smile crossed his face. Because panic makes people predictable. We reached the corner where traffic waited at a red light. Adrian paused before crossing and glanced toward the opposite sidewalk. Do you see the woman with the yellow umbrella? I nodded. She looked completely ordinary, scrolling through her phone while waiting for the signal to change. She arrived outside the library yesterday, Adrian said softly. She was near your campus this afternoon. She entered the cafe 5 minutes after you did. My stomach tightened. You think she is following me? No. He looked at me with quiet certainty. I think she is following me. The light turned green, and the crowd moved together across the crosswalk. Halfway to the other side, I instinctively glanced back. The woman with the yellow umbrella remained standing on the curb, watching neither Adrian nor me. Instead, she was staring directly at the cafe window we had just left. A black envelope rested on our empty table exactly where neither of us had left one. Whatever message it contained, someone had managed to place it there while we were sitting only a few feet away. I wanted to go back into the cafe and open the envelope immediately, but Adrian lightly touched my sleeve before I could turn around. It was the first time he had ever reached toward me, and even then his gesture carried no force, only quiet urgency. Not yet, he said. If someone wanted us to read it there, they also wanted to watch us read it. I looked through the cafe window once more. Customers laughed over coffee. A college student typed on a laptop near the entrance. The waitress who had served us was wiping another table, completely unaware that a black envelope rested only a few feet away. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. That was what frightened me the most. We continued walking until we reached Bryant Park. The evening crowd drifted between food carts and benches wrapped in soft yellow lights. Office workers hurried toward the subway while tourists paused to photograph the skyline. Adrian finally stopped beneath a row of maple trees whose leaves had begun turning shades of amber and crimson. Tell me something honestly, I said. How long have you known about me? He looked upward for a moment as though measuring the answer. 3 days. I stared at him. Only 3? The moment you served table 7. His answer surprised me. Somehow I had convinced myself he had been watching me for weeks. Then why did you know about Emily? About nursing school? Adrian slipped one hand into his coat pocket and removed a small leather notebook. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were several neatly written pages. My work schedule. Nursing school calendar. Public scholarship announcements. A charity fundraiser where my name appeared among volunteer staff. Nothing private. Nothing stolen. Everything had come from information anyone could technically find if they knew where to look. I slowly closed the notebook. You investigated me. Yes. Why? Because someone else already had. His voice remained calm, but I noticed something new. Weariness. The kind that could not be hidden behind expensive clothes or careful words. I wanted to know why. A gust of cool wind scattered dry leaves across the sidewalk. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. Did you find an answer? Adrian hesitated. Not one I wanted. Before I could ask what he meant, a familiar ringtone interrupted us. This time it was not my phone. Adrian glanced at the screen before answering. He spoke only 4 words. I understand. Thank you. Then he ended the call. What happened? I asked. He remained silent for several seconds. The envelope is gone. My eyes widened. Someone took it? He nodded once. Less than 2 minutes after we left. I looked back toward the direction of the cafe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then whoever left it never intended us to read it. Correct. It was bait. Yes. We resumed walking in silence. My mind replayed every strange moment from the past 3 days. The photograph. The anonymous message. The elderly gentleman. The woman with the yellow umbrella. None of it felt random anymore. Someone had been carefully arranging pieces of a puzzle, making sure I discovered each one at exactly the right time. Adrian, I said quietly, you told me someone inside your family believes old secrets should stay hidden. Yes. Who? He stopped walking. For the first time since we met, he answered without hesitation. My older brother, Victor. The name hung heavily between us. Does he know about me? Adrian's expression hardened in a way I had not seen before. That is what I have been trying to prevent. I searched his face, realizing another possibility I had somehow ignored. The people following us, they are not trying to learn what I know. Adrian slowly shook his head. No. Then what do they want? His answer came so quietly that I almost missed it. They want to know what I remember. A cold wave of confusion swept over me. Remember? Adrian, I have never met these people before. He held my gaze with absolute certainty. Claire, that is exactly what someone has spent 27 years making sure you believe. I could not answer him. 27 years. The number echoed through my mind with impossible weight. I was 27 years old. Adrian was asking me to believe that whatever had begun before I could even remember was somehow still shaping my life. You think I forgot something? I asked quietly. Not forgot, he replied. Hidden. The difference unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. We found an empty bench beneath a maple tree whose golden leaves drifted lazily across the path every time the wind stirred. Families walked past with shopping bags. A little boy chased pigeons while his father laughed from a nearby fountain. Life continued around us with effortless normality, making our conversation feel even more unreal. Adrian remained silent for a long moment before reaching inside his coat and removing a worn leather wallet. From one of its hidden compartments, he carefully unfolded an old photograph protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. I have carried this for 15 years, he said. He handed it to me with surprising care. It showed 3 people standing in front of a lakeside cabin during summer. A smiling young woman held a toddler in her arms while a man stood beside them wearing a baseball cap and a faded denim jacket. The toddler could not have been older than 2. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Who are they? I asked. Adrian pointed first to the woman. Evelyn Harper. Then to the man. Daniel Harper. Her husband. Finally his finger rested beside the child. Their daughter. I studied the little girl's face. Children change so much as they grow that it was difficult to recognize anyone with certainty. Yet something about the eyes felt strangely familiar. You think this is me? Adrian did not answer immediately. I think someone wanted the world to believe that child disappeared forever. My heartbeat quickened. Where did you get this? From my father. I looked up sharply. Your father knew them? Adrian slowly nodded. Better than he ever admitted. I searched his face for signs of uncertainty, but there were none. Then why did he never tell anyone? A shadow crossed Adrian's expression. Because my family has been protecting the wrong secret for decades. Before I could ask what that meant, another voice interrupted us. Mr. Bennet. We both turned. An elderly gentleman approached along the park path carrying a neatly folded newspaper beneath one arm. I recognized him instantly. He was the same silver-haired man who had mysteriously appeared inside Ashford House and disappeared just as quickly. Tonight he smiled politely, as though we were meeting under perfectly ordinary circumstances. I apologize for interrupting, he said. May I have a moment? Adrian remained seated. You already know the answer, Arthur. The older man sighed softly. Your brother knows you found the photograph. My stomach tightened. Adrian's expression barely changed. I expected as much. Arthur looked toward me with gentle eyes that carried far more sadness than suspicion. Miss Morgan, I wish we had met under different circumstances. Who are you? I asked. My name is Arthur Collins. I worked for the Bennet family for more than 30 years. His voice remained calm and respectful. I also knew Evelyn Harper. I instinctively gripped the photograph tighter. Arthur noticed but did not comment. Instead he reached into his coat pocket and removed a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. She asked me to keep this safe if anything ever happened. He held it toward me instead of Adrian. I believe it belongs to you now. I stared at the key without moving. I have never seen it before. Arthur smiled sadly. No. But your mother certainly had. The world seemed to stop. I looked from the key to Adrian, searching for any sign that Arthur had misspoken. Adrian simply lowered his eyes for a brief moment before meeting mine again. He did not correct the older man. He did not explain it away. He only whispered the words that changed everything. Claire. Evelyn Harper was not the woman who looked like you. She was the woman who gave birth to you. I forgot how to breathe. The sounds of Bryant Park faded until all I could hear was the faint rustle of leaves overhead and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. My fingers tightened around the old brass key while the photograph rested on my lap, suddenly heavier than paper should have been. No, I whispered. That cannot be true. It was the only sentence my mind could produce. I had spent my entire life believing I knew exactly where I came from. My parents had raised me with love, celebrated every birthday, attended every school play, encouraged every impossible dream. Nothing about my childhood had ever felt borrowed. Nothing had ever suggested another story existed beneath it. Arthur lowered himself carefully onto the opposite end of the bench. His movements were slow, respectful, as though he understood that every word from this point forward carried the weight of an entire lifetime. The people who raised you loved you, he said gently. Never doubt that. I looked at him through eyes that had already begun to blur. Then why was I never told? Arthur remained silent. Adrian answered instead. Because they believed silence would protect you. I turned toward him. Protect me from what? He drew a slow breath before speaking. From becoming part of a conflict that began before you were born. I shook my head. You keep talking about conflicts and secrets, but nobody tells me what actually happened. Adrian looked toward Arthur, who gave a quiet nod. It was permission. Nothing more. Adrian folded his hands together before finally speaking without riddles. 27 years ago, my father invested in a community housing project. Daniel Harper was the lead architect. Evelyn organized the neighborhood outreach program. They became close friends with my parents. He paused, choosing accuracy over speed. During that project, Daniel discovered financial records that did not match official reports. Millions of dollars had quietly disappeared through shell companies created by people outside our family. Outside your family? I asked. Adrian nodded. Yes. My father wanted the authorities involved immediately. Other influential people wanted the records to disappear instead. Arthur quietly continued the story. Daniel refused to destroy what he had found. Evelyn supported him. They believed telling the truth mattered more than protecting powerful reputations. I stared at the brass key resting in my palm. What does this open? Arthur smiled sadly. A safety deposit box. Daniel placed copies of every document inside before anyone realized what he had done. The pieces slowly began fitting together, but one question still overshadowed all the others. Then why was everyone searching for Evelyn all these years? Adrian's expression grew distant. Because almost everyone believed she had taken the only copy of those records with her. But she did not? No. He looked directly into my eyes. She entrusted the key to Arthur and asked him to protect it until the only person she trusted completely was old enough to choose what to do with it. I looked back at the small brass key, noticing for the first time that tiny initials had been engraved near its base. C.H. Claire Harper. My throat tightened. My last name should have been Harper. Arthur nodded softly. Yes. Tears filled my eyes, not because I suddenly loved the name Morgan any less, but because I realized I had been carrying two histories without knowing either one completely. My parents. I whispered. The ones who raised me, did they know? Arthur answered immediately. They knew enough to keep you safe. They never accepted money. They never asked questions. They simply chose to love a little girl who needed a peaceful home. I closed my eyes as relief and sorrow collided inside me. Whatever mystery surrounded my birth, one truth remained untouched. I had been deeply loved. Adrian watched me quietly before speaking again. Claire, there is one more thing you deserve to know. I slowly looked up. The missing financial records were never the real reason people searched for you. Confusion returned instantly. Then what was? Adrian reached into his coat and carefully unfolded one final document, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. At the bottom of the page were two signatures. One belonged to Daniel Harper. The other belonged to Adrian's father. Above them, written in bold letters across the top, were 5 words that explained everything. Trust agreement establishing the Bennett Foundation. The document trembled slightly in Adrian's hands as the evening breeze swept across the park. I stared at the words until they no longer looked like words at all. Trust agreement establishing the Bennett Foundation. My eyes moved to the signatures again. Daniel Harper. Richard Bennett. They had not been enemies. They had been partners. Every assumption I had made over the past week quietly collapsed beneath that single realization. My father and yours built this foundation together, Adrian said softly. Their goal was simple. Affordable housing, scholarships, neighborhood clinics, and educational programs that would remain independent from political influence. Arthur nodded. Everything they planned was designed to help ordinary families. They believed lasting change should never depend on who held power. I looked from one man to the other, trying to reconcile the story with everything I had believed about the Bennett name. Then why did everyone spend decades hiding the truth? Adrian answered with visible regret. Because after my father became seriously ill, people around him stopped protecting his vision and started protecting their own positions. The foundation survived, but the original agreement disappeared. Without it, no one could prove how the organization was supposed to operate. I lowered my eyes toward the brass key resting in my palm. Suddenly it felt less like a key and more like a promise someone had carried across 27 years. The safety deposit box, I whispered. It still exists? Arthur smiled gently. Every annual fee was paid anonymously. Every single year. By who? I asked. Adrian hesitated only briefly. Me. I looked at him in disbelief. You never opened it? He slowly shook his head. The box was not left to me. It was left to Claire Harper when she became old enough to decide what truth meant. The sincerity in his voice silenced every doubt I had been carrying about him. He had possessed the opportunity for years. He could have opened the box, destroyed whatever remained inside, or simply walked away. Instead, he had protected something that did not belong to him because someone else's final wish mattered more than his own curiosity. "You trusted someone you had never met," I said quietly. Adrian smiled for the first time without sadness behind it. "No. I trusted the people who wrote the agreement." We left the park together just as the city lights reflected against the glass towers surrounding Midtown. Arthur wished us both well before disappearing into the evening crowd, moving with the peaceful confidence of a man who had finally fulfilled a promise carried for decades. Adrian and I walked several blocks without speaking. We no longer needed to fill every silence with questions. Some answers required space before they could become real. When we reached the entrance to my apartment building, I expected him to say goodnight and leave. Instead, he stopped several feet away, careful to give me room. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "the bank opens at 9 o'clock. I nodded. "You will come with me?" "Only if you ask." I studied him beneath the soft glow of the street lamp. A week earlier I would have described Adrian Bennett as an untouchable businessman surrounded by mystery. Now I saw someone carrying the weight of decisions made long before either of us had any voice in them. "I am asking," I replied. He inclined his head respectfully. "Then I will be there." As I stepped inside my building, my phone vibrated with a news alert. The headline immediately caught my attention. "Bennett Foundation announces emergency board meeting following internal leadership changes." I opened the article and quickly realized something important. Adrian's older brother, Victor Bennett, had resigned from every leadership position within the foundation only an hour earlier. No scandal. No public accusations. Just a brief statement thanking him for his years of service. I looked back through the glass doors. Adrian was still standing on the sidewalk, watching the lights of the city instead of the building. He had not fought to gain more power. He had quietly chosen to remove the one obstacle standing between the foundation's original purpose and the future my parents had imagined. In that moment I finally understood that the greatest victory is not defeating an enemy. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let another generation inherit a lie. 1 year later, I stood behind the familiar counter at Ashford House, smoothing the edge of a crisp white tablecloth before the dinner service began. Some people assumed I would never return after everything that had happened. They imagined I would leave New York, change my name, or spend my days managing a charitable foundation that now carried part of my family's legacy. Instead, I chose to stay exactly where my story had changed. There was something strangely comforting about ordinary routines. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The quiet clink of polished silverware. The rich aroma of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Life had taught me that extraordinary moments rarely announced themselves. They usually arrived disguised as another ordinary evening. Nursing school was finally behind me. 3 months earlier I had accepted my first position at a community health clinic funded by the restored Bennett Foundation. Every scholarship my parents had dreamed about was active again. Every neighborhood project described in the original agreement had quietly begun moving forward. The foundation no longer existed to protect powerful names. It existed to honor ordinary families who deserved opportunities they could never have afforded alone. My adoptive parents remained exactly what they had always been to me. Mom and Dad. Learning the truth about my past had never erased the love that raised me. If anything, it had taught me that family is built twice. Once by birth. Once by choice. Emily still teased me every Sunday over breakfast, insisting I smiled more than I used to. She was right. Peace has a way of changing a person's face before they ever notice it themselves. At exactly 7 o'clock, the host quietly approached my station. "Claire," he said with a knowing smile, "someone specifically requested your section." I looked toward the dining room. My breath caught for just a moment. Table 7. Adrian Bennett stood beside it instead of sitting down. Gone were the constant meetings, endless headlines, and guarded expressions that had once surrounded him. He wore a simple navy blazer over an open-collar white shirt, looking more like a man enjoying a quiet evening than someone carrying the weight of an old family name. When our eyes met, he smiled with a calmness I had never seen during those first uncertain days. I walked toward him carrying a menu out of habit more than necessity. "Good evening," I said with the same words I had spoken countless times before. "Welcome back." Adrian accepted the menu but never opened it. "Thank you." For a brief moment neither of us spoke. We did not need to. The silence between us no longer carried unanswered questions. It carried understanding. Finally he glanced at the empty chair across the table before looking back at me. "May I sit here?" I laughed softly. "You already are." He smiled, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. "That is not what I meant." Warm light reflected across the polished tabletop as I considered the question hidden beneath his words. A year ago I would have answered from fear. Months ago I might have answered from uncertainty. Tonight I answered from peace. I placed the second menu on the opposite side of the table and took the empty seat. "Only if we agree on one thing." "Name it." No more stories built on silence. Adrian extended his hand across the table. I accepted it without hesitation. "Agreed." Around us, conversations continued, glasses clinked gently together, and another ordinary evening unfolded inside Ashford House. No one noticed the quiet promise being made at a single table. They saw only two people sharing dinner. They never knew that years of misunderstanding had ended not with revenge, not with power, and not with victory over another person, but with two simple decisions. One person chose to tell the truth. The other chose to believe it. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest lies are not always the ones people tell us. They are the ones fear convinces us to live. And sometimes the bravest thing we will ever do is pull up a chair, face the past without running from it, and discover that the truth does not come to destroy our future. It comes to give us one.